In today's interconnected world, we interact with people from all different cultures, especially in the work environment. I'm from California in the United States, which, according to the January 2020 issue of U.S. News and World Reports, holds 7 of the top 10 spots of the most diverse big cities in the United States. But even if you don't live in a city steeped in diversity, you are still communicating with people from different cultures, thanks very much to the Internet. The most comprehensive study of culture is the one conducted by Geert Hofstede for IBM, but that was way back in the 1960s and early 70s. The question is, do these taxonomies still apply today? Enter the GLOBE project, which is described as a unique large-scale study of cultural practices, leadership ideals, and generalized and interpersonal trust in 150 countries in collaboration with nearly 500 researchers. A lot of words to say. It's a big study. GLOBE, founded by Robert House in 1991, stands for Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness. While this study focused on the interrelationships between societal culture, societal effectiveness, and organizational leadership, we'll be focusing on the societal culture aspect. This video will offer a very brief comparison of Hofstede's and GLOBE's taxonomies, and then focus on describing the 9 cultural dimensions of the GLOBE study: performance orientation, assertiveness, future orientation, humane orientation, institutional collectivism, in-group collectivism, gender egalitarianism, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance, although we will cover them in a different order than they are presented on the GLOBE project website. If you've seen my last video on Hofstede's cultural taxonomies, the same caveats apply. These are likelihoods, not absolutes. Like Hofstede, GLOBE's research focused on national culture, and culture is more than that. I'm hoping you already have a working knowledge of Hofstede's cultural taxonomies. Culture is dynamic, meaning cultural practices change over time, so the placement of a particular culture on one end of the scale today may be different from what it was in the past, as well as where it might be in the future. And I already told you that I'm from the United States, so you'll likely hear some of my biases in our discussion. Let's compare the two approaches of Hofstede and GLOBE. The basic concept is the same. Both use a scale to plot a country's values. Hofstede's scale ran from 0 to 100 or more, while the GLOBE project scale is limited to 7 points. Like Hofstede, the GLOBE project is a large-scale research project based on data from 17,000 managers from 62 countries around the world. And there are some countries missing from the list. So when I don't mention countries like Norway or Iceland as countries with, say, strong women's rights, that's because they weren't one of those 62 countries in the study. Also, both projects were focused on an international business perspective. Hofstede focused on IBM employees, while GLOBE looked at middle managers. In terms of differences, the most obvious is the number of the dimensions. Hofstede's has 6, while GLOBE has 9. Keep in mind that House, the founder of the GLOBE project, had Hofstede's research to build on. In fact, GLOBE takes apart some of Hofstede's taxonomies and reworks them. However, GLOBE does offer 2 unique cultural dimensions. The GLOBE project also looked at practices, what is, and values, what should be. It's one thing to say you value equality between the sexes, but another thing to actually practice it. The study also looked at leadership issues, but we won't go into that in this video. Finally, not only did the GLOBE project break down the results by country, but also organize the countries into 10 culture groups, allowing for some easier comparisons. This radar chart that looks like a spider web shows the differences in scoring between 2 of these culture groups, Nordic Europe and Eastern Europe. Or, if you prefer, the bar chart. These are only included to show you that there are definitely differences between the 2 culture groups, but you're welcome to stop and rewind the video if you want to look at them in detail. So now, on to the dimensions, some of which are identical to Hofstede's, some variations, and some that can be considered new. To be clear, these groupings are my opinion. We'll start with the 2 Hofstede dimensions that GLOBE validated. They even carry the same names. You'll recall that uncertainty avoidance relates to the tolerance a society has towards uncertainty. Are you uncomfortable with uncertainty so that you need rigid rules to know exactly what is going to happen? Or can you deal with ambiguity, letting things unfold, and viewing the lack of knowing as interesting? The Globe Project identifies Sweden, Singapore, Denmark, and Germany as high on the scale, meaning they are much more open to uncertainty. On the other end of the scale, cultures that are uncomfortable with ambiguity, you'll find Russia, Hungary, Guatemala, and Bolivia. The United States is placed in about the middle of the scale. And you should remember that power distance refers to the concept that some cultures accept that inequity is normal. Power is not distributed equally, a decentralized power structure, where authority is highly respected and followed, while other cultures view status as less important, not automatically accepting people's and government's authority. In the words of the Globe Project, the extent to which the community accepts and endorses authority, power differences, and status privileges. Countries with higher power distances, more likely to accept power inequities between people and organizations, are Nigeria, El Salvador, Zimbabwe, Argentina, Thailand, and South Korea. Countries with lower power distances, with more of a centralized power structure and more likely to question their leaders when they disagree with them, are Denmark, South Africa, the Netherlands, and Bolivia. Where is the US? More toward the lower power distance side. Now we're moving to some of the globe dimensions that you're relatively familiar with, as they are variations of some of Hofstede's taxonomies. Hofstede's long-term orientation taxonomy becomes future orientation in the Globe Project. This involves the degree to which people plan for the future, such as investing. It also relates to spontaneity and how you plan for social gatherings. The variation? There is no mention of a past orientation. Scoring high on this list, these are the planners: Singapore, South Africa, the Netherlands, Malaysia, and Austria. The low-scoring countries, the live for the present approach, are Russia, Argentina, Poland, Hungary, and Guatemala. You'll find the US on the higher end of the scale. While we do have national policies focused on future goals, we also live in the moment. The US has the most credit card debt in the world. Let's move to what Hofstede called the individualism versus collectivism dimension, which Globe separated into two: institutional collectivism and in-group collectivism. The first deals with connection to groups and organizations in general for practical reasons, while the other focuses more on family and more intimate group connections, more emotional cohesiveness and pride. And yes, according to this research, there is a difference between these two dimensions. The countries that score high on one dimension are not necessarily the same ones scoring high on the other dimension. Institutional collectivism is defined as the degree to which organizational and societal institutional practices encourage and reward collective distribution of resources and collective action. Okay, you can think of this as collectivism as a practicality. How much do you support the pooling of community resources to ensure others are taken care of, even if it means that your own goals suffer? Countries scoring high on this dimension are Sweden, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and New Zealand. In these cultures, there is more of a concern for the group than the individual. Think about employees who take a pay cut to ensure that others are able to keep their jobs. The group is more important than the individual. Greece, Hungary, Germany, Argentina, and Italy score lower on this dimension, meaning that the society's economic system is designed to help facilitate the individual's interests rather than the group's. And where is the US in comparison to other countries? Towards the middle, but leaning towards the lower end of the scale. In-group collectivism relates to a culture's cohesiveness, pride, and loyalty to their organizations and family. I think of it as the emotional equivalent of institutional collectivism. Children and parents take pride in each other's accomplishments, and children tend to live with their parents until marriage, and the adult children take their aging parents into their homes. Cultures scoring high on this dimension, showing a strong family cohesiveness, are the Philippines, Georgia in Eastern Europe, Iran, and India. In India, for example, married couples traditionally continue living with the husband's family after marriage. Low-scoring cultures on the in-group collectivism dimension are Denmark, Sweden, New Zealand, and the Netherlands. You'll also find the US on this side of the scale. Hofstede's masculinity versus femininity taxonomy has been separated into two different globe dimensions: assertiveness, a characteristic typically ascribed to males, and gender egalitarianism, characteristics usually applied to females. Assertiveness is the degree to which individuals are forceful, confrontational, and aggressive, what Hofstede identified as masculine characteristics, as opposed to cooperative and compassionate, traditionally a feminine characteristic. Countries loading high on this scale are Albania, Nigeria, Hungary, Germany, and Hong Kong, where direct communication is favored. In these countries, if you want something, you ask for it, and you make your expectations clear and unambiguous. And yes, you'll see the United States in the top 10% of countries in terms of assertiveness. On the low end of the scale are Sweden, New Zealand, Switzerland, and Japan, where the desire is more towards consensus building and cooperation. Representing the feminine side of Hofstede's masculinity versus femininity taxonomy is Globe's gender egalitarian dimension, sometimes referred to as gender differentiation, how much women are considered equal to men in terms of status, power, and job opportunities. In cultures rating high on this scale, you'll see women having more job opportunities and holding powerful positions. That includes countries like Hungary, Russia, Poland, and Slovenia. On the lower end of the scale, where women have lower status both at work and in the home, are South Korea, Kuwait, Egypt, and Morocco. In Morocco, for example, while women make up about half of the country's population, only about 1 in 4 holds jobs outside of the home, a fact that I noticed when I visited that country about 4 years ago. And here is an example of my bias as a woman in the U.S. Remember that a score of 7 on the globe scale would be a country where men and women have achieved true equality. Yet the highest score on this dimension is Hungary's 4.08, and in the United States, where I live, has yet to see a female president. Interesting when you compare the U.S. gender egalitarian value score, what we say we want to be, it is significantly higher than what we say happens in practice, 5.6 in value versus 3.34 in practice. Two globe dimensions are considered new: humane orientation and performance orientation. Humane, in this case, refers to human rights, how much fairness, altruism, generosity, and kindness are encouraged and valued. I can see this as yet another extrapolation of the femininity characteristics Hofstede identified, but on a larger scale. High-scoring countries on this humane dimension are Zambia, the Philippines, Ireland, Malaysia, and Thailand. These countries tend to be more concerned about being kind and fair to others. Spain, Greece, Hungary, Germany, and France are the lowest-scoring countries. That's not to say they don't care about human rights, but they don't emphasize it as much. The U.S. is placed near the middle of the scale, but closer to the humane side. The second new dimension is performance orientation, which focuses on how much a community encourages and rewards high standards, improvement in performance, and innovation. You might think of this as an emphasis on tasks. Training, feedback, and explicit communication can improve performance, and people are more valued for what they do, not who they are. Countries emphasizing high performance are Singapore, Albania, Hong Kong, New Zealand, and South Africa. And yes, the U.S. is in the upper 10% of high performance orientation countries, but not the highest. Countries scoring lower on this dimension are more likely to value the individual as a person, and negative feedback is more implied so as not to make the other feel uncomfortable. Countries like Greece, Venezuela, Russia, Hungary, and Qatar fall on the low end of the scale. Well, that was a lot to cover. Even if you can't remember which culture is high on which dimension, you should at least be able to understand that different cultures have different values and behaviors, and that both Hofstede's research and the Globe Project help us organize and understand these differences. With that, I'll say goodbye from Sacramento, California, the third most diverse city in the USA.